This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome to NC Spin. Well, this was a big week in our state, and we want our panel to catch you up and give you their analysis of the protest we witnessed, the opening of the legislative short session, and what lawmakers may consider. And if we have time, we want to discuss the Supreme Court decision to allow states to regulate betting on sporting events. But, as always, we will ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. Speaking of them, joining us on this week's panel are Rufus Edmisten, former Attorney General, former Secretary of State, Chris Fitzsimom, analyst and columnist, John Hood, syndicated columnist and author, and we welcome Patrick Sebastian, a political analyst and consultant. We begin our uninterrupted debate after these brief messages by our underwriters.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
Let's get started. In anticipation of the opening of the General Assembly, Raleigh was the scene of two mass gatherings. On Monday, the Moral Majority held the start of session protest rally. Then on Wednesday, teachers gathered in Raleigh to rally also. Patrick Sebastian, I want to discuss the Moral Monday protest, but perhaps the big story coming out this week was the fact that the teacher rally had to be moved to a smaller space because of another group planning a rally on Halifax Mall. Is this story all we're being told? I mean, why wasn't the smaller group moved to a smaller space?
As my understanding, it was a legitimate scheduling conflict. But I don't think the union teacher rally really cared either way. They accomplished exactly what they wanted to accomplish, which was dominating the news cycle. You had news reporters that were embedded in their buses coming in. You had news reporters that were in the crowd. You had the governor actually protesting in front of his own building, which was kind of awkward. But I got to tell you, they dominated the news cycle. They got exactly what they wanted. They even went into the legislature and were kind of bad-mouthing legislators. And guess what? The legislative Republican majority cheered them. So they came in and they dominated and they got what they wanted, I believe.
I want to get back to that in just a second. But Chris, I want to talk about the Moral Monday. It's part of the Poor People's Campaign, which Reverend William Barber has sort of co-founded and is now a national movement. The speakers at this rally urged people to speak out about how the poor are being treated in our state. They mentioned women's pay lagging behind, men's pay, the LGBT community not being protected properly. My question is, with Reverend Barber in Washington and not in Raleigh, is this movement going to have the same impact as it had before, or is it going to kind of lose steam?
Well, I don't know. I guess we'll see. But it's not a North Carolina-based movement. It's a national movement that Bishop Barber, I guess now, has started across the country, and it's all based on economics. I do think there's a benefit to focus on, despite some economic gains throughout in various places. We still have an underclass that is struggling, and I don't think we talk enough about them. And for whatever you think of the positions on all these issues, I do think it's an important part of figuring out how we're a better society. We have millions of people who live in poverty. We have a lot of kids in North Carolina living in poverty, and we need to do something about it. I think that's the fundamental message.
Can't ignore it.
Right.
Okay, so John, after some time at this rally, a group of protesters wearing brown armbands, I'm not sure I understand the significance of that, got out and stopped traffic on Jones Street. Police asked them politely to move. They didn't. But unlike what has happened in so many of the legislative protests, they weren't arrested and cuffed. They were given citations for impeding traffic. What do you think of that?
I think it's fine to give people citations for impeding traffic as long as they're not still impeding traffic. If they refuse to move, you move them. So I assume in this case there was no resistance. They didn't refuse to leave the street. If they had, they should absolutely have been forcibly removed. You don't have a right to stop traffic.
But Rufus, you're our resident lawyer here, or at least you used to pretend to be one when you were Attorney General. What's the difference between getting a citation for impeding traffic and being arrested?
Well, the citation says, now you be a good boy and don't do this again, and getting arrested gives you a record. The citation is more like a jaywalking. This is a little bit more. But I think that was the proper thing to do. And as John said, if they're out there impeding traffic, that's a very serious offense that somebody's going to get hurt and they should have been removed.
Chris, let's go back to the teachers' rally, because that was really the big story. Organizers say there were 30,000 people there. The Raleigh Merchants Association said there were only 19,000. Does size matter here? I mean, no one can deny this was one of the biggest crowds that ever show up in Raleigh at a protest or a rally before. Red shirts were everywhere. Would it have made a difference if there were 10,000 more or less?
Well, I mean, I think if there were 5,000 or 10,000, it would have made a difference. I think most people think there were 20-something thousand people there. There could have been 25, there could have been 30. It was one of the biggest rallies in recent memory in North Carolina. I think it was the NCAE is getting credit or blame depending on which side you are and what you think of them. But this actually was not initially an NCAE idea. This was something that's sweeping the country, that teachers and people who believe public schools are not being treated properly. And I don't think it's actually just about teacher pay. I don't think it's about class size. I think it's about a feeling of disrespect. Teachers don't feel like their profession is respected. And I think this is a history of whatever you think of it. There's a lot of rhetoric in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years about teachers, government monopoly schools, and why are they raising our children, and we're doing all these. And I think there's a perception in the public school community that public schools themselves aren't.
So was it just the media attention, Patrick? Because teacher pay is really the big story that came out of this rally, was it not?
It was, and this is generally a political rally put together by a political organization, and that's fine. You have every right to do it. What I would do as a Republican that was pushed back against, for instance, Governor Cooper, who's out there blaming corporate tax cuts for teacher pay not being what he thinks it should be, but then he's at the same time, really has the audacity at the same time to be offering Apple and Amazon tens of millions of dollars in tax cuts to come to North Carolina. So if I'm a Republican, I'm calling him on that and say, why are you giving people that don't need the money
we're going to
tax cuts?
talk about the Apple issue later on, but so far as it goes, I think it's not just Governor Cooper that's giving them the millions of dollars. John, Patrick made a mention of the NCAE being a union. Yes. You wrote a column about this past week. Been all kinds of debate in the past about whether NCAE is a union or not. Does it matter? The big difference, of course, is that they don't sit at the table and negotiate and bargain with legislators, and they can't strike.
The reason why this matters is because union is not a popular term. So NCAE does not like it and does not typically publicly use it. It is, however, not legally disputable. There is absolutely no question that NCAE fits the definition of a labor organization under the National Labor Relations Act. The Congress had many opportunities back when they passed all these bills to specify that collective bargaining was a requirement to be a union, and they voted it down every time. You do not have to have former collective bargaining authority to be a union. NCAE is the state chapter or state affiliate of one of the largest unions in the world. It is silly to deny that they're a union. Sometimes they say they're a union. Like this week, some of them said they were a union.
Mark Jewell, the president.
But do I think this is a critically important issue? No. I think the only reason why I ever commented about it is because it is so annoying that every time they claim to not be a union, news organizations that ought to know better just take their claim at face value. It is absolutely false.
Is that similar to Republicans not being able to say Democratic instead of Democrat?
Yes. Though in that case, there's not a legal definition to repair to.
Rufus, let's get back to this. The president of NCAE spoke to the rally, and he said that group had done something that had never been done before. He said, you were able to close down the learning today and take the teaching to the General Assembly. What do you think of his remarks?
I didn't like that comment at all. When you start closing down learning, you're doing something that is very, very derogatory, in my opinion. He didn't need to be speaking. But I spoke with a number of those marchers out there. I'm not sure they were all union. And I've been a teacher, unlike most of the people sitting at this table. and your day never ends. And we keep forgetting that these teachers have to have 4-year degrees. And you compare the 4-year degrees of other people in other occupations, they are woefully short. And so I don't blame them. And I think there were some very, very nice people out there who weren't thinking that we're a union. And if you need more teachers' aides, I didn't see those marching. That's what I'd love to see.
Yeah, Chris, the NCAA really sort of became a focal point of this whole thing instead of the issues for the teachers.
And that's partially because that's what the Republicans want to talk about union. They don't want to talk about cuts to funding or supplies or how teachers are feeling. I mean,
well,
I think
going
that's
back
part
to
of the
something
strategy.
Patrick said a little earlier in the show, and is the question, is NCAE helping or hurting the cause? Because I think there were a number of Republican legislators that sort of chafed at the fact that NCAE was...
and called them thugs, as Representative Mark Brody did. Although it's interesting, Representative Brody was quoted in the paper meeting with the teachers, agreeing with them that we shouldn't have performance pay, for example, of all things, which the NCAE opposes. And I think that what I read and you talked to some legislators who were there, they actually thought the vast majority of teachers were respectful. They had good conversations. The legislators learned from them. And I do think it's worth making one point. Senator Berger and others have criticized teachers for missing a day of school. There have been a lot of pro-school choice rallies at the General Assembly where charter school students, voucher students, and parents came on a school day. They weren't learning that day, and Republican legislators rushed to talk to them, and they had big assemblies. They weren't as giant, because there's not as many of them, but this happens quite often at the General Assembly where students and teachers from various factions come, and I think we're going to treat them.
But not
wait a minute. You mean the parents chose to take their kids to a political rally, and that's the same thing as being forced to make arrangements because the school system is closed down?
So you think all the
parents?
It is the same thing. If all the teachers you think every single kid at a charter school's parents had a vote at the charter school that they would all go to Raleigh that day?
The charter schools, are you saying the charter schools in those cases were closed and the parents had no alternatives?
Yes, I'm saying that charter schools were closed and voucher schools were closed if the parents and the teachers came to the General Assembly. I'm sure all the parents
made their decisions. These schools were not allowed to make the decisions.
Who made the decision at the school?
The teachers did a walkout and refused to show up for work.
So if you're a charter
school,
school,
they had to shut the schools down.
And what happens if you're a charter school parent who didn't want to go to Raleigh and your charter school is closed?
It's an interesting question, but I very seriously doubt that there was a similar arrangement.
You think every single charter parent agreed with every charter school?
I think the vast majority.
While these two talk apples and oranges, please let me change the subject. Patrick, the National Association of North Carolina Association of School Administrators sent a letter to the legislators in which they said they didn't endorse the rally. Now, this is a group of superintendents and principals. What impact did that have?
Well, it doesn't help. And, I think one reason why people are not all latching onto this thing is because people like Mark Jewell, they add things to these rallies like expanding Obamacare. They add things like, let's go against charter schools. So he's making this big umbrella and adding everything he can to it. And not all the teachers there agree that we should expand Obamacare. It has nothing to do with education. And
well, it did turn political, did it not, Rufus? They had the governor come speak.
Well, by nature, all of them are political.
Let me finish my question. Okay. Then Mark Jewell stood up and said, not only that, but we got to go to the polls in November and elect more people to be with him come next year in the General Assembly. Yeah. Very political, right?
It was a very political rally, which is not unusual for rallies on Raleigh when people have grievances, and there's nothing wrong with that. As Patrick himself said, there's nothing wrong with people doing it. It's okay to recognize that it was partially a political rally, yes.
And it's also worth, and I agree with Chris about this, most of the conversations that happened between the teachers, most of whom, by the way, are not members of NCAE, and legislators were very positive from both sides. Not only did legislators say they learned something from teachers, but a number of legislators told me that teachers weren't aware of what had been happening recently, and the legislators told them.
I want to ask the two of you, with trepidation of starting another feud here.
Go ahead.
So House Speaker Tim Moore said that the facts weren't coming out so far as support for teachers, pay raises, school funding, and so forth like that. The teachers on the other side say, wait a minute, they're talking about we're getting $50,000 a year. Not that many teachers are getting it, and they have cut funding to schools. My question is, whose facts should we believe here? Because both sides are trying to give us numbers.
There are some statements that both sides made that are inaccurate, but the fundamental message the two sides offered are not inconsistent. In other words, teacher pay has gone up a lot recently, and the average pay is about $51,000. By the way, that means lots of people must be below average. That's what average means.
Yeah.
But It is also true that if you adjust for inflation, teacher compensation right now, teacher pay at least, is not where it was at the peak of 2008. Both of those statements are true. Those are consistent statements.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, and I also think.
Wait a minute. The two of y'all are agreeing.
You tried, but you didn't get it.
No, it's not. It's true that teacher pay has gone up, but it's also true that teachers are making less when you adjust for inflation than they were before the Great Recession. That's true. I was disappointed that Senator Berger didn't endorse a plan to push the teacher pay to at least the national average, which we had reached a time or two. We're still the same percentage below the national average as we were before the Republicans took over the General Assembly. The Republicans have increased funding in some areas. They've cut funding in a lot of other areas. I think this has been a giant, I hope, educational experience, and I'm glad the teachers did it, frankly.
All right, so I was interested and intrigued by a report that WRAL Television published. They followed Representative Craig Horn around Wednesday. He is the House guru, if you will, on education matters. Craig said that if teachers wanted to speak to him, don't send him emails. Don't necessarily come to the legislature en masse. He said his preferred way of talking with teachers is to have them invite him to their schools, but that very few teachers do that. Do you think lawmakers would show up if they were invited to go to schools?
I do, and I think Craig Horn is a very sincere pro-education legislator. I absolutely think he would go. I think sometimes they don't feel welcome. And look, the teachers are great folks. My mother was a teacher. She'd be out there fighting for raises as well. It's sometimes I don't think legislators, especially Republican legislators, feel welcome by people like the union leader, Mark Jewell, who just want to attack all the time. I think they should engage with legislators, and I think
you're just not going to let that union business drop, are you?
You got to say union as many times as you can.
But I think legislators should also engage and take the first step sometimes too, and go to these high schools.
I want to say one thing. I don't think there are many public schools in North Carolina where legislators would not feel welcomed. They would not be welcomed.
And in fact, these conversations do happen at schools. They do visit schools. Maybe Craig just hasn't gotten enough invitations yet, and he deserves them.
I have a feeling that after this program is over, his inbox is going to be flooded with invitations. All right, so I want to go around the horn here. Tell me, what do you think changed after all the rhetoric, after all of the noise that was made, after all the discussions and disputing of facts and so forth like that? Did anything change, Rufus?
No, it was a great rally, and a lot of people got to show that they believe in the First Amendment. But the original premise that the governor and the General Assembly have differences will prevail.
Okay. Chris?
I'm not sure anything dramatic changed, but I do think the issue of public schools and public education is back before us. It's never really gone away, but I think it has been heightened or raised up on the agenda of the state and voters' minds and the public's mind and the media's mind, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
John?
Teachers certainly had a great opportunity to make their message out, put their message out. However, North Carolinians now heard repeatedly that teachers make an average of $51,000 a year. They didn't previously know that, and the political consequences of that are not exactly what NCAA thinks.
Okay. Patrick?
Well, I think what maybe changed is there's total agreement. The difference really is only between a 6% raise and an 8% raise. And, you know, there is no argument between the two parties of we should give teacher raises or not. They both want to give teachers raises. It's just a matter of how much.
Well, see, you're reinforcing the point that I made earlier, and that is that the primary discussion was about teacher raises. And granted, there was no question about the fact that that was a major point of this rally. Yep. But it went beyond that. It went to having support personnel. It went to having more money for supplies and
class size.
Yeah, things of that nature. And that kind of got lost.
Well, I
in
saw
the
average teacher spends $500
out of their own pocket.
Out of their own pocket, and you know that's good, but they shouldn't have to do that.
Well, so while there were thousands of teachers outside, it was almost like a carnival atmosphere inside the legislative building to signal the opening of the short session of the legislature. Despite having to pass through metal detectors to get into the building, there was a lot of excitement as lawmakers, lobbyists, the media, and the public gathered. Rufus, aside from the teacher rally, the big buzz in Raleigh late this past week has been a negotiation with Apple to locate a campus, a major campus here in the RTP area that could see as many as 3,000 employees and a $2 billion investment by Apple. The legislature has been meeting, and the governor has had talks and plans to sweeten the pie on economic incentives for landing some of these big fish, because we've not had a very good track record in this in the past. You think our state's willing to cough up $2 to $3 billion in economic incentives if we have to, and should they?
Well, you and I have been on a lot of economic development trips, and we know that really the money, in my opinion, is not the thing that turns a trick for economic development. It's your workforce, your tax situation, and here we go again, offering to give the Treasury away to specific industries, and I don't know what more you can do except give the Treasury away. I hope they don't.
John, so far as it goes, this has been a terribly kept secret, supposedly, even though House Speaker Tim Moore said the media was doing a terrible job of inaccurately reporting what was going on. Are we?
Well, in fairness to Speaker Moore and Senate Leader Phil Berger, who made this point, they're right that recently there have been a lot of inaccurate reporting, remember, about plants we supposedly got that we didn't get. So sometimes the media does get out ahead of the facts. But obviously there's clearly the Apple project is an obvious possibility and is influencing or informing this conversation.
Chris, back to the session. House and Senate leadership announced a week or so ago that they had agreed on a spending package of $23.9 million. Now, Governor Cooper says he wants $24.5 billion. But my question is, has the House really earmarked line items in that $23.9 billion, or is this just sort of spending targets for the appropriations?
We don't know. They've certainly reached a spending target. The governor wants to delay or not have the next phase into the corporate tax reduction to pay for the extra money he wants to give the teacher pay.
And personal income taxes for people making over $200,000.
Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we keep hearing reports that they've made an agreement on a lot of major budget items, not just the revenue target. I find that both encouraging if your life is at the legislative building and you want to get home this summer. But as a democracy, I think it's a bad idea to not. That means we will never have had real public hearings about how we're going to make these budget adjustments. And I think with that more open the budget process is, the better for everybody.
Patrick, both Speaker Moore and Senate President Pro Tem Berger say they're going to be pay increases not only for teachers but also for state employees. Now, frankly, the state employees are a little chafed because in recent years, their pay increases has been a one-time bonus and a few more days off. They're saying if we're going to get some pay increases, we ought to get a permanent increase of our base salary. Agree or disagree?
Totally agree. They always get left behind, the teachers. There's no doubt about it. And
I'm not talking about teachers. I'm talking about rank and file employees too.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a rivalry between, I guess you could say, the different segments of state employees. And I do hope they will get that pay increase that they deserve. And look, I think people, and going back to teachers, frankly, they're more in our lives most likely than someone at the DMV. It's just a fact.
Usually about this time of the year, we start hearing about the April surprise or the April disappointment that is a result of personal income taxes. I haven't heard anything about that so far this year.
Well, they have announced that they got a surplus.
They've got a $600 million
yes.
But it's important to know, the surplus is one-time money. That shouldn't affect the permanent pay increases.
Not all of it is one time.
Well,
some of it is recurring because they're also expecting a revenue surplus in the following year. So some of it is recurring, but some of it is one time.
So let's hit some of the big issues that we expect this legislature to tackle. One of them is school safety, Rufus.
Well, they already the House made an investment in that already just yesterday.
Yeah.
And another is prison. Something has to happen about the prison system, Tom. We've had the deadliest prison killings that I've known in my entire career in North Carolina, and we have to do something about safety for prisons. We have to do, and by the way, this is supposed to be a budget adjustment session. Well, there are a lot of other things like you mentioned school safety. They've got redistricting going on. They've got judicial.
Chris, I was going to ask you about that. Justin Burr got defeated. He's been the primary instigator of judicial redistricting. What's going to happen there?
Well, I don't know, but I think the House and Senate are still trying to find the votes to do something behind it. I think one of the big sleeper issues of the session, we saw some activity in the first day, is what to do about pollution, Gen X, Chemours. Some Republicans want to give more money to the policy collaboratory at UNC instead of the Department of Environmental Quality. That's a big flashpoint in this session.
John, real quickly, any other big issues you think of?
Look for constitutional amendments to be placed on the November ballot.
And
I
perhaps
think there
a
will
bond
be more
referendum.
than one.
Yeah.
Possibly, but I wouldn't count on that one.
All right, I can't let this show end without going around and asking the panel to tell us something we don't know, because if I do, I'm going to get criticized all week long. So, Chris, start us off. Tell us something we don't know.
Here's something I don't say often. Good for Senator Richard Burr. Unlike his House counterpart, he stood up, I thought, running the Senate Intelligence Committee, and his committee concluded that A, Russia interfered with our election, and B, they did it to help Donald Trump. The second thing I would say, bad for North Carolina conservatives who are claiming that Mueller needs to finish up his investigation. It's been 1 year. The Whitewater investigation of President Clinton took 2,932 days.
All right, quickly, Rufus, tell us something we don't know.
44 years ago in 1973, the Sam Ervin Committee went into operation.
All right.
I was there.
Yo, Patrick, tell us something we don't know.
Webb Simpson, a Broughton alumni, high school alumni from Raleigh, lives in Charlotte, won the Players' Championship last week.
$1.9 million. John, tell us something we don't know.
Latest economic data came out on personal income growth in North Carolina in the top 10 to 12 again, as we have been for a while.
All right, well, that's good. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week and read our feedback, read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook, and join us next week for our Memorial Day edition. We're going to be talking about rural issues. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
Today's tools make you a real DIYer, and as a member of an electric cooperative, you have lots of valuable tools to help you do it yourself in controlling your home energy use and budget, leaving you free to be Dad.
Quality of life enjoyed by North Carolinians comes from the sacrifice of our state and local government retirees. These men and women risked their lives in times of danger. They taught our children, kept our neighborhoods clean, and protected the state's resources. They are North Carolina's silent heroes. The North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association proudly serves as the voice for more than 300,000 retirees across North Carolina. Our retirees deserve no less, and every day we stand by them.
North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.